Good afternoon, everyone. This is Joe Schollaert with AFIMAC, and I want to thank you for joining us today for our presentation on hurricane preparedness and planning. I'll just give a couple more seconds here to see if anyone else joins on the webinar, and then we will get started. Okay, again, Joe Schollaert with AFIMAC. Today we're going to be going through and talking about how to prepare your organization for a hurricane that will help reduce the impact and potential downtime as a result of that event and or storm. Some of the things that we will go through today and touch upon will be some general hurricane facts, the hurricane preparedness plan, what that means and how that fits into an overall business continuity plan, the objectives that your plan should cover, and what are the objectives both internally to your organization as well as externally to the community. The types of zones that are impacted and or identified during a catastrophic event. Some things to know regarding the vulnerability of your business, how to assess those. Touching base with your local community and understanding and knowing evacuation routes. Some general hurricane preparations that should be done. How you should prepare your facility when you know that a storm is approaching, what to do when a hurricane watch is actually issued, how to react and what needs to be done during the hurricane as well as after the hurricane, some recovery activity that you would be faced with as well, and then we'll conclude with a summation as well as some time for some question and answer as well. So some hurricane facts. Hurricanes generate a series of threats, not only to property, but the lives of your organization and those individuals within that community. The biggest and most obvious threat, obviously, is posed to buildings and equipment, as well as the people due to the high winds, which categorize these storms. Another serious threat to life and property also comes from actually the storm surge, which occurs in the coastal areas. Actually, in most of the major storms that have occurred here in the recent years, even though we have been blessed and haven't had any major impacts, the ones that have occurred, it's really the storm surge that creates the problem for those organizations that operate in those coastal areas. Little additional facts regarding how the National Weather Service rates hurricanes based upon their intensity, and they use a scale from 1 to 5. A Category 1 hurricane generally exists when you have winds that are sustained between 74 and 95 miles per hour, and you have a expected storm surge of 4 to 5 feet above the normal tide. Category 1s generally do not create too much of an impact on an organization. However, as we walk through these categories, these types of storms can actually escalate from one category to another very quickly, and depending upon temperature and actually their path and travel regarding open water and land. Category 2 is actually a Category 2 hurricane consists of winds to 96 to 110 miles per hour with a storm surge expectation of 9 to 12 feet. You then move to a Category 3 when those winds exceed 111 miles per hour but are less than 130, and that storm surge rises in that 9 to 12 feet above normal tide as well. And then the category 4 is 131 miles per hour wind up to 155, storm surge of 13 to 18 feet above. Obviously, those are very deadly and storms that can cause a lot of damage. And then the top level is a category 5, which is obviously the most severe storm, where you have winds that are greater than 155 miles per hour. A storm surge that exceeds 18 feet above the normal tide. That's actually the most recent ones that have occurred and caused the most damage have all been a category 4 or category 5 hurricane. So as far as a hurricane preparedness plan, hurricanes are violent storms, obviously, and they bring intense winds, heavy rains. We talked about the storm surges as we were walking through the categories of hurricanes, and they also cause a lot of erosion to the coastal areas, landslides, and actually you can have tornadoes that spin off of the hurricanes and are produced out of those storms as well. So you might be dealing with multiple type of natural disasters that are occurring, not only with a hurricane, but also a tornado that may develop as a result of the storm as well. While it's difficult to predict the exact time, place, and category of hurricanes, you always have to be prepared. The hurricane season runs generally through June through November, with storm activity really starting to pick up in late August, September, and October. The NOAA is really predicting along the Atlantic, where most of those storms do occur. There's a 70% chance of a likelihood of 6 to 11 named storms this year, which would be winds greater than 39 miles per hour or higher. Of which, those 6 to 11, 3 to 6 of them could become hurricanes, with winds greater than 74 miles per hour. At most, 2 of these are expected to become major hurricanes, defined as a 3, 4, or 5, which are categorized by the winds of 111 miles per hour or higher. So as you can see, there's a lot of activity that generally occurs, but very few reach the level of a category 3, 4, or 5. But as indicated previously, you need to be prepared for these scenarios when they develop. You can't be in a position where you're trying to react to a category 3, 4, or 5 without some preparation that has already occurred. So what is that purpose of planning? Well, that's really to establish an efficient means of providing continuity of your operations during a hurricane or a severe weather event that causes generalized flooding or structural damage, and you can reduce the impact of this by implementing procedures and policies, which are all part of your overall business continuity plan. When we first started today, I mentioned that a hurricane preparation plan is really part of an overall business continuity plan. The business continuity plan really needs to be developed, and this really is just one facet of that overall plan. You may have other events that impact your business that are part of that contingency plan, and there may be some shared resources or shared activity as a result of your overall BCP, but the hurricane piece of it would just be exactly that, one facet within your overall business continuity plan. Some of the objectives of your plan when you're putting together a hurricane plan is you need to provide an effective plan for obviously continuing operations if in fact it's a situation that will allow you to do so. If you do operate, your facility or your business is probably going to be without normal utility service and without means of obtaining outside assistance. There's going to be a lot of activities. There's going to be a tremendous draw on your local resources and outside assistance in the area. So you need to factor that into your overall plan on doing as much as you can internally, or having the systems in place and or the internal resources so that you do not rely on outside assistance as much. You really need to outline each department's responsibility for storm preparation and continuing the services during and after a storm. This isn't a one person is assigned to develop your hurricane plan and it lies with that individual, and they have the ultimate responsibility of executing on the plan. This is really an overall team concept as it relates to your hurricane plan. It's important that you engage all the departments that might be affected, and you actually have a team assembled that'll carry out each function within your plan. You want to provide a logical and flexible chain of command. This will allow maximum uses of your internal resources. It'll be a very hectic and confusing time as it relates to that. There's going to be a lot of asks put on individuals. So you need to make sure that it's concisely outlined exactly what is the chain of command, what is the communication levels, what is that process as it relates to that, so that you can make sure that you can actually minimize and mitigate this event as much as possible. You want to minimize, obviously, injury and or illness to people, and the effect would be to limit the damage or loss of property and or records. Records are one area that many people don't put enough emphasis on. If you don't have some type of off-site storage as it relates to your records, you need to make sure that you do have that. Obviously, that information is backed up if it's electronic, and or if you have paper and or physical records that are on property, you need to make sure that you plan and you take care of those records on site as well, and have a plan in place so that you don't have to go back and try to recreate something that could have been saved if the time and attention was put there from the beginning. Obviously, too, one of the biggest areas is going to be to maximize the safety and protection of employees and visitors that are on site during a hurricane. Know that evacuation plan, as I mentioned, one of the things that we'll cover. Know how, in fact, those visitors and employees will be marshaled, what the evacuation route is all about, how, in fact, you account for those individuals that are on site during that time. So let's talk a little bit about the types of zones that have been identified through the emergency management offices. All of you would have access to your local emergency management office that's going to be listed under emergency management, whether you still have a directory that you'd refer to, or you access that via the internet or make that connection. They're going to have an emergency operations center or a similar title under the emergency management banner. Sometimes they may actually fall under the fire department and or the police department, depending on the size of the geographic location and or your area. So two zones that you have to concern yourself with during a hurricane scenario would be the evacuation zone, which is in essence the coastal areas which are at greater danger from both strong winds and storm surges. You need to take note if your business is actually located in an evacuation zone. You'll need to plan for both high winds and the high water if in fact you're in that evacuation zone. You're easily going to be able to tell this too, depending upon where you're located. Many times you'll see the blue signage that is posted by the communities as far as evacuation routes. Generally, that's going to be a good sign that you're in an evacuation zone. And then there's the contingency zones, which are areas that can be affected by the high winds from major hurricanes. So you're not going to experience the storm surges that someone located in an evacuation zone would. Some of these zones obviously extend well inland. So as the storm approaches and makes landfall, the storm surge obviously would supplies, but these contingency zones would still be impacted by high wind. Businesses that are located within either type of these zones should have a hurricane preparedness plan. It's a good idea to develop a plan for action and have your staff ready for any type of disaster. And like I said, it's extremely important, imperative that you contact your local emergency management staff to determine where your business is located if you aren't sure, and then ultimately to make that connection and have that line of communication there so that your first call to that emergency management staff isn't during the event, but actually you have some communications ahead of time. So things to know about the vulnerability of your business. Where are you geographically located? Geographical information and infrastructure knowledge of your location will be a tremendous benefit to you during this time. Know the elevation of your business. How high above sea level are you located? What's the potential impact of a storm surge if that's the case? Know the condition of your building. When was the last time you had an assessment of the facility done? When did you check the integrity of the building last? What might need to be improved and or repaired, or when was the last time that you had some type of repair done to the building? Where are your vulnerabilities based upon the condition of your building as well, and or your property? Depending upon the severity of a hurricane and its projected path, which can vary greatly. You'll see all the projections as far as the path of a storm. They can vary tremendously, quite honestly. But you'll have at least a couple days notice or some idea in advance of that projected path. Local officials may recommend that you evacuate in those evacuation zones only, or they actually may extend that out for the contingency zones as well as regarding an evacuation, depending upon the level of the storm, the category of the storm, and the winds that are expected. You want to obtain information on the evacuation routes that should be used from your local emergency management office. I mentioned a little earlier that generally you're going to see signage that is placed up as far as an evacuation route. Make sure that you understand that. Make sure you understand exactly what your local emergency management resources are going to do in the event of evacuation. And what I mean by that is generally they're going to maybe close lanes that might be inbound and actually move them all to outbound traffic. So you need to have an understanding of exactly what that evacuation route is going to be, and get an estimate for the travel times on those routes and the potential problem areas, bottlenecks that might occur as a result of that, low areas that might flood that depending upon the level of the storm, that yes, it's the designated evacuation route, but there may be situations where certain areas of that evacuation route might become jeopardized and be in a situation where you cannot pass. Some general hurricane preparations. Anybody in business, whether you're a business owner or a manager that's operating that business, should develop a basic security or hurricane awareness. You're responsible for protecting the facility and the employees. And really that's the most important piece of it, are the employees of your operations. Buildings can be reconstructed. Human lives are obviously much more fragile. So you need to make sure that you take into consideration your employees and or visitors. Suggested pre-hurricane season planning activities that you should take into consideration would be an employee preparation. Make sure that you introduce your plan to the staff and your employees. Determine which members will need to carry out hurricane preparations, who you can reasonably expect to be available during that time. And develop a simple written plan. Make sure that it is written, make sure that it's accessible, make sure that it's actually communicated out and disseminated to the employees. And this plan needs to incorporate a set of hurricane task assignments for your staff. So you've gone through and you've identified those key players that would be involved in your response plan. Make sure that you have some task assignment so that they know exactly what's going to be expected of them. So that when the event happens, it becomes actually kind of just a natural reaction to start into their assignments based upon that plan, rather than have to sit back and think through it and have some delayed start time as a result of getting to their tasks. Input should be solicited from all the various work centers in your facilities and/or departments. How is it going to affect them? What they would need to do, what are critical areas for them, what are mission critical areas as it relates to their business within the company. Factor that into the overall plan, make sure that it is addressed so that each one of those areas of operation are in fact accounted for and the necessary provisions are in place to make sure that you mitigate the impact on that business and that department. Outline the specific tasks that have to be performed to protect your facility during a hurricane. Not only an actual hurricane, but a watch or a warning as well. How will those tasks be accomplished and who will perform them? Again, it's extremely important to lay that out ahead of time. It's recommended that teams are created for those various tasks. A team for board up, or a team to secure exterior equipment. If you have exterior equipment that's out, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to move it to a certain location within the property? Are you actually going to tie that down? Whatever the case may be. So you need to identify those teams that can get that done. Again, I'll go back to my earlier comment, is this isn't a single individual's responsibility, and it's going to take a coordinated effort to make sure that you mitigate the impact to your business. Outline your hurricane response plan and task assignments at a training session, whether that's a tabletop training session, whether you actually do a live event, so to speak, where you put individuals through a training session and actually engage them, but at least have something where it's done and actually the individuals understand it, understand what needs to be done. Again, can be as simple as a tabletop exercise or more extensive as a live exercise. Let's talk a little bit about facility preparation. If your facility is in a storm surge and it appears that it's going to be unsafe for the occupancy during high winds, it would be recommended that you completely evacuate it. This is not an easy decision as a business and an operation because you understand exactly what that means as it relates to your business. But again, it goes back to the safety of the individuals and the personnel that you have there. So if you need to make sure, you need to make that call, please obviously err on that side of caution and evacuate the facility. Review a list of major equipment and furnishings to determine which items need to be protected or removed, and record how in fact you plan to do it. One of the things that in addition to not only making sure that you move or secure this equipment and or furnishings and the protection thereof, but after an event, if you are impacted severely, this is good information that you would have on hand for any insurance claims or any adjusters that may need information. So you need to make sure that you make note of any major equipment or furnishing that might be there, and protect your equipment and furnishings in place or move them. I'd mentioned a little while ago that in fact, if you have mobile equipment and you want to move it to a certain location or within the boundaries of the facility or a more centrally located location, then make sure that you in fact protect that as much as you can. And whether that's building some fencing and or walls that would help protect that area as well. Identify that outside equipment furnishing which would be blown loose, tie it down. Obviously, items that are airborne as a result of the high winds can be extremely dangerous. So you need to make sure that anything that would be and have the potential to be blown about during the high winds, that it's actually secured. Determine where things will be stored and how to secure it in place, as I mentioned earlier. Strongly anchor any portable storage buildings. Make sure that rooftop equipment, such as exhaust fans, wind turbines, air conditioning units, are securely fastened or strapped down on the roof deck. Again, one of the first things that's going to be impacted is the roof of the facility. So you need to make sure that you can, if in fact it doesn't get to a level where it does a lot of damage to the roof, that at least those items that are generally housed on a roof are securely fastened. If the roof is a composition roof with gravel covering, if you can, it's not always the easiest thing to do, but remove some loose gravel to preclude damage to the unprotected windows. And ensure that members of your staff know how to turn off the electrical power. Not only power, but water, gas, and any other utility services within the building at the main switches. So that doesn't actually then facilitate a larger event, some type of explosion as a result of the utilities not being turned off, and eliminate the potential for a more catastrophic event than you're facing. Some recommended supplies. It's recommended that you get several battery-operated radios or spare batteries for radios that you have, so that you can receive emergency information. Have at least one of those radios on site that receives the NOAA weather radio frequency, so that you in fact can get updates as that department releases that information. Procure sufficient flashlights and battery-powered lights to allow essential work. You lose power in the facility, but you still need to get engaged and or carry out your tasks that were assigned. So make sure that there's lighting there that can allow that to happen. And compile a disaster supply kit, have it ready for emergencies. If you don't have storm shutters, ensure that you have the necessary tools to board up windows and brace doors. And the first priority, again, goes back to protecting your facility and your people, that will allow it to not be damaged and keep it out of, as much as possible, reduce the amount of damage as a result of wind. Some of those recommended supplies also will include any plywood. Generally, you're going to want to go at least 5/8 of an inch thick for an exterior to cover large windows and glass doors that can be blown in by hurricane force winds. Obviously, again, that glass can cause tremendous damage to individuals as well. High pressure and wind-blown debris can break windows and doors as well. An ample supply of brooms, obviously mops and absorbents to remove any water as a result of flooding in the storm surge. If you have a small generator, or actually multiple generators, or ideally if you have a backup generator that's already established as a power source, if in fact you lose power for an extended period of time, not only during a hurricane, but actually before it actually comes even ashore. An emergency generator can provide the capability to maintain lighting, recharge batteries, and equipment, power pumps that would be necessary to remove water, and any tools that may be needed for repairs. If it's possible, obtain the plywood before hurricane season begins and pre-cut it to size. Mark each panel to identify where it goes and store it where it's needed. So again, it goes back to that preparation piece of not waiting till you need the supplies when the event occurs. Go as far as actually identifying and marking where supplies and or materials may need to go during an event. Sufficient lumber should be on hand to brace inward and opening exterior doors and any roll-up doors. Again, the board should be 2x4s or larger so that they can withstand the wind. Waterproof tape, or at a minimum duct tape or filament tape to help protect smaller windows in your facility. You can actually put that tape over the windows, and that wouldn't obviously stop it from breaking, but it would stop it from potentially shattering and those glass fragments and being blown about. Tie down materials such as rope and chains for outside furnishings and any equipment that can be moved. Heavy duty plastic sheeting and furring strips, and a nail or staple gun to expedite roof and or window repairs. Obviously, you want to try to get these things repaired quickly, and the appropriate tools will allow you to do so. And then if you need an ample supply of sandbags, is also helpful in preventing intrusion of water through doorways or low-lying sections of the building. What do you do if a hurricane watch is issued? Implementation of precautionary activities would be is you refer to your hurricane task assignment and begin your pre-planned activities to prepare the facility and staff for the threat of a hurricane. Some of those other additional suggested actions would be monitor radio and television newscasts for further information. Generally, in these situations, power is not going to be an issue on a watch, so you need to make sure that you monitor the media as much as possible so that you can get up to the minute information, and hopefully it's correct. Check and verify adequacy of essential emergency equipment and supplies. Begin to secure or store exterior equipment. Assemble any equipment or materials that will be needed to protect windows and other glass by boarding them up, and to protect vulnerable doors by bracing them. Fill any vehicles with their fuel tanks. Make sure that whether that's diesel fuel or whether that's some type of propane for your equipment, whatever the case may be, make sure that you have those topped off and they're full. And fuel may not be readily available during the evacuation activities, so you need to make sure that you do that ahead of time. Water is extremely important, and making sure that individuals have access to water. So you need to begin storing water in containers that can be used, whether that's bottled water or some other manner of housing that water. Update your list of all business records that may need to be moved and or protected, and back up your computer data. Generally, if you're doing a daily backup of that, it would be obviously very beneficial that you'd run a manual backup of existing, so that in fact you can get the most information. If you're doing daily backups, obviously you'd be losing just that one day, but if you could do a backup to get the most up-to-date information, that would be ideal. In general, businesses in evacuation zones should be evacuated promptly when the hurricane warnings are issued. If an evacuation of your area is recommended by local officials, go ahead and close the business, relocate vital business records, relocate that expensive equipment out of the area if you can move it. Where possible, make sure that you move furnishings away from exterior windows and doors. Close, lock, and board up any large windows and glass doors, and ensure all personnel have departed the facility. It's extremely important from the accountability standpoint. You need to make sure that all the individuals have left, and I would highly recommend that you have a team that would go through and sweep the facility before the last individual leaves to make sure that, in fact, everyone has departed. If an evacuation is not recommended, Take the appropriate protective measures to reduce the vulnerability of wind damage. Have building maintenance personnel on standby. Actually bring in individuals who might not be working or off shift to build up your maintenance team because they will be extremely busy or can be extremely busy trying to get the facility up and running again. And prepare for a loss of utilities. And you should really prepare for that for a 72-hour period. Hopefully you would get some power restored quicker than that, but for a minimum, plan to be without utilities and or power for up to 72 hours. So what happens during a hurricane? If your facility is not in the evacuation area and you still expect to receive some storm effects, use interior rooms and corridors as much as possible. In multi-story buildings, make sure that you shelter those individuals on lower floors and avoid corner rooms. Again, get to the interior of the facility. Avoid areas next to exterior windows and doors. Periodically conduct an internal check of the buildings and ensure that those being sheltered do remain indoors during the hurricane. Don't allow someone to leave as a result of maybe getting a phone call from home, or in fact they realize that they need to go out and take care of something. If you're in fact sheltered in place, make sure you leave everyone there and you do not allow them to leave. Check with your company's attorney, whether that's inside counsel or outside counsel, to determine the potential liability before using your facility as a hurricane shelter. Generally, that's identified very early on. You'll know if you're a qualified shelter for a hurricane, but you need to make sure that you check with your legal team as well as far as the potential liability and at least have the business covered if in fact that is the case. If you evacuate your facility, you may have difficulty returning to it quickly. Understand that as well. Initially, access to storm damaged areas will be limited, maybe to search and rescue personnel, law enforcement, firefighters, utility crews, and road clearing teams. So you need to understand that if in fact you do evacuate your facility and a hurricane does come through, it may be some time before you can get back into that. Look for obvious structural damages when you do return to your facility. Make sure that structurally it is sound before you allow individuals to come back into the facility. You need to check for downed or any dangling electrical power lines or broken sewer or water pipes on your property, and make sure that you secure the property. Whether that's a local security team, an outside security team, whatever the case may be, is you want to make sure that you can control the ingress and egress of your property as much as possible. Again, attention to the fact that you need to provide for the safety of employees and or visitors onto the property. And the local resources that are there and community resources there that are there to help your business get back up and running. Some recovery activity would be to report damage to your insurance company as required by all policies. Make sure that you document any damage found in your building and or the contents. Best way to do that is through photographs or video. It tells a story to an underwriter very well and to the insurance company. If possible, be present when the insurance adjuster inspects the property. Make sure that you take them to certain areas. Don't allow them just to kind of wander on their own. Repair any damage to automatic sprinkler systems as soon as possible to make sure that you don't have a fire hazard as a result of the damage, and that your fire protection or your fire suppression system is back in service as quick as possible. And then make sure that you contact local building inspections officials to determine if permit requirements or rebuilding guidelines are needed after a disaster. Again, you want to check for the structural integrity of your facility, and you will probably need some type of building inspection to be done by a governmental agency make sure that you have that in place before allowing anybody back onto the property. So know your risks and what to do. We talked about a fair amount of things in this very short period of time, but what you need to make sure that you understand, and if you know your risks, you'll have a better understanding of what it is that you're supposed to do in the event of a storm. Again, it's important that you really contact that local emergency management office to learn about evacuation route and their emergency plans, your community's emergency plan, how that dovetails into your individual business plan as well. Get as much information as you can from FEMA. You can go on their website at FEMA.gov, the READY campaign, which is ready.gov, Citizen Corp, the American Red Cross will have information, and then NOAA's National Hurricane Center, which the URL there is identified as far as getting an update on the status of a hurricane and any warnings and or information that NOAA is putting out on the event. Inquire about emergency plan and procedures at your child's school and or workplace, as well as your spouse or significant other. Make a disaster plan that includes employees, guests, and contacts with locations to reunite if you become separated. So you want to make sure that you have all that contact information. How in fact you will make sure that individuals are in fact safe. And that includes your employees, any guests to your facilities, making sure that you have all that contact information up to date. I'm going to touch slightly on social media at the end as well, and how you can use that during the event as well. Obviously, a lot of communications occur through social media nowadays, so that's a very quick way that you can get information disseminated. Assemble a disaster supply kit that you would need, and then obviously gather important documents that your business may need. A little bit about our organization. We get involved in providing support services for businesses that might be impacted by some event that they don't deal with on a day-to-day basis. One of those obviously is the natural disasters, which we were talking about today. We'll be glad to give you some more information about us if in fact you'd desire. All you need to do is just let us know via the information that you would get as far as the webinar. I touched a little bit about social media. Social media can be an extremely valuable tool in this day and age as it relates to a business continuity plan, and specifically a hurricane plan. Twitter specifically, from the standpoint of making sure that you actually are able to communicate information, whether your company has your own YouTube channel, whether your company has your own Facebook account or your own Twitter account, where you can actually on Twitter use hashtags and be able to monitor activity that's going out there, or get information out as it relates to your plan or what's going on to your employees. Obviously, social media is instantaneous. It's a way to, again, not only disseminate information, but also assemble groups of people quickly as well. You can actually use social media on the front end of your planning so that you can organize those teams that we talked about earlier as far as making sure that you assemble those groups. So you could use social media to do that. So again, keep in mind the tools and all those tools that are there and available to you, and social media would be one of those tools, and a very effective tool on getting information disseminated quickly. If you have any questions or any items that come up, just let me know. I can be reached at this information. Some of those questions, or if you have a question that you'd like to ask now, you can do so, and I'll be glad to answer any of those. All right. I'm not seeing any questions come in or chat. With that, I would like to conclude the webinar. I appreciate everybody attending. Hopefully you found some of this information effective, and if in fact you would want to dive a little bit deeper as far as hurricane planning and preparedness, I'll be glad to do so. If you'd want the webinar, it will be available. So if you're interested and want a copy of the presentation, we'll be glad to send it out to you. And with that, I wish everybody a good rest of your afternoon and productive week. Thank you.